Hey everybody, today we're doing Unit 9, Notes number 4, the Vietnam War in the 1960s. So this week you will have just one Ed puzzle, Ed puzzle on these notes. There will be a key term activity where I'll give you all the key terms for this unit. I'm also going to attach the PDFs so that we can kind of read through them. You don't have to watch the videos again to find the definitions. You have to give me like a book definition. You will have to attach an image and also put the word in your own words. So use the key term, define it how you would define it. So you have Edpuzzle, key terms, of course your raps for the week. And I'm debating whether or not to assign you another worksheet. So we will see. I will also make another video this week just to give you some updates in terms of like how the end of the year will go, grading, if you have any questions about that, and just kind of how things are going. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So since the 1800s, France had controlled Vietnam. It was known as French Indochina. So Vietnam was a colony or territory of France. Then, during World War II, during Japan's aggression, they took over Vietnam, took it from the French. So once Japan surrendered, the Vietnamese people thought, oh, we're independent now, but the French thought it was their opportunity to take back their territory. So the Vietnamese had no intention of becoming subjects again, and so they wanted to remain independent. So that's kind of where this initial conflict begins right after World War II. So the Vietnamese, they want to be independent. The French want to take it over again. So this leads to instability in Vietnam. So the Viet Minh uprising. In 1945, the French faced Vietnamese resistance to their authority. So the French, they wished to re-seize control over its longtime colonial possession. The Viet Minh were a group of Vietnamese freedom fighters whose goal was an independent Vietnam. So they did not want the French to control them. They wanted to be independent, have an independent government, start their own government without outside influence. So Ho Chi Minh, he is a pro-communist who was exiled to China and the Soviet Union during World War II. So he led the Viet Minh. And so this has a big factor into which side the U.S. chooses. So the U.S., we began as a territorial colony. We revolted, got our independence. So kind of everything says that we should side with the Viet Minh, that we should side with the country that wants to be independent, that wants to rule over themselves. However, because Ho Chi Minh wants to establish Vietnam as a communist country, that puts us at odds during the Cold War. And so because of that, we support the French in their efforts to gain control. We see it as part of our containment policy. We're trying to, contain communism, not let it spread to Vietnam. So we have the French, who is supported by the U.S. Then you have the Viet Minh, and they are supported by the Soviets and also China. So they're supported by the two big communist countries. So again, this is all about what the Cold War is about. So never do you see the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, but we're on opposite sides of a lot of these conflicts. This conflict in particular is also very similar to the Korean War. So the domino theory. By 1950, the U.S. was aiding the French with money and supplies to fight the Viet Minh. Avoiding sending U.S. troops, America relied on France to contain communism in Vietnam. So at this point, this is still like the early 1950s. We are backing them, helping them with probably financially, probably have military advisors, but we don't have U.S. troops there yet. In 1954, President Eisenhower introduces the domino theory to justify U.S. aid. Ike explains that countries on the brink of communism will all eventually fall if the U.S. fails to contain it from the start. And so you think of dominoes, just like this image right here. And if one country were to fall to communism, all of the neighboring countries would then also kind of fall in line too. So the idea is that we have to prevent Vietnam from succumbing to this communist threat because we do not want to see this whole area become communist. In 1954, the U.S. aid fails and the French surrender Vietnam at Dien Bien Phu. Ho Chi Minh's communists control the entire northern region of Vietnam. So France does not win. The Vietnamese people succeed in their revolution, so to speak. But right now, the Viet Minh are just in control of northern Vietnam. So here are some images. You have a map of the region. So this is where the French had surrendered. And so just like with Korea, Vietnam will be separated. I believe it's the 17th parallel. So South Vietnam will end up becoming under the control of democratic-based leaders supported by the U.S. The North will be under the control of Ho Chi Minh. There's supposed to be an election. People will decide who gets to control the whole country. So with France driven out of Vietnam, the U.S. needed to step up involvement. The U.S. turns to the anti-communist nationalists of South Vietnam. U.S. economic and military aid would flow to the southern regime. With increased U.S. aid, Vietnam plunged into a bloody civil war. So now let's look at Civil War in Vietnam. Vietnam divided. 1954, world powers convened to discuss Vietnam at the Geneva Accords. Vietnam is divided along the 17th parallel, and so two separate countries develop. You have South Vietnam, it's a democratic republic, the capital is Saigon, and it's led by Ngo Dinh Diem, and it's backed by the U.S. So the U.S. is supporting this leader. We hope that he can unite the people, gain more support, but we will see that that does not happen. So then you also have North Vietnam. It is a communist state. The capital is Hanoi, and it's led by Ho Chi Minh, and they are backed, supported by the Soviet Union and China. So at Geneva, all sides agreed that free elections would be held to unify Vietnam, so that the people, the Vietnamese people, would decide: do you want to have Ho Chi Minh as leader of the entire country, or Ngo Dinh Diem as the leader? Do you want democracy, communism? Which guy, essentially, do you want to unify our country? However, Diem did not, the people of Vietnam did not love him. He had lots of bad habits. He did not he did not support the Buddhists within Vietnam. People felt that he promoted people into government positions that they were not qualified for. So he did not win the support of the people. So the U.S. sensed that the communists would win, and so Diem canceled elections in 1956. So here's another map, just again to give you the idea. It's such a long and skinny country, and so it's divided here at the 17th parallel. You have Saigon, the capital's down here, and then you have northern Vietnam there. So Diem's corruption. Diem's regime in democratic South Vietnam would serve to contain Ho Chi Minh. The U.S. would send money, supplies, and military advisors to the South in order to support him. However, Diem seemed more interested in following his own political agenda, not necessarily in advancing democracy and gaining the support and loyalty of the people. Diem's government was corrupt. He would pocket funds. He suppressed opposition, people that would protest his rulings. He persecuted and killed Buddhist monks, Buddhist people, causing Buddhist monks to burn themselves in protest. So here you have a picture of a Buddhist monk. He dumped gasoline on himself and actually was filmed and broadcasted, and then lit himself on fire in protest of this guy. So you have to think that for somebody to do that, just how bad and corrupt do they have to be that they would go to those lengths to protest him being in charge? November 1963, aware that Diem was too corrupt to contain the communist North, the U.S. secretly had Diem assassinated. So the U.S. no longer wanted to support him, to back him. They knew that they would not be able to convince the people to support democratic Vietnam under his leadership. Finally, the Vietnam War is Americanized. Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Each regime after Diem was more corrupt and incompetent than the next. It soon became evident that the U.S. would have to directly fight the North itself. So on August 2nd, 1964, a North Vietnamese patrol boat fires on the USS Maddox. It led to U.S. airstrikes into North Vietnam and gave LBJ a reason to send troops. So this allows President Johnson to expand U.S. involvement in the war. August 7th, 1964, Congress approves the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So this is not a declaration of war. The resolution gives him unchecked military authority. Johnson could use military force as he saw fit in Vietnam without votes or approval. So this is the beginning of escalation of the war on the U.S. behalf. And we'll see that the war will continue throughout the 1960s. It will go into the 1970s. So next week we will end. We'll have one more set of notes, and it will end. We'll wrap up the Vietnam War. Next week we will also have a key term quiz. So remember, if you have questions, need help with something, make sure you send me an email or send me a message on Remind.